Hello, and welcome to Stowe Talks, a podcast designed to support people going through a relationship breakdown and all the challenges this brings. I'm Matthew Taylor.
And I'm Liza Gatchell, family lawyers at Stowe Family Law. And today we're delighted to welcome one of the UK's leading divorce coaches, the divorce and separation coach, Chloe O, to look at the best way to plan the holidays as a separated parents. So welcome to the Stowe Talks podcast, Chloe. Could you start just by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to see you again, Lisa and Matt.
Lovely to see you.
I'm a Franco-American expat. I've been living in London for, I think, 18 years now. I'm a divorced mother of two preteen girls. And on the professional side, I am a conflict resolution specialist and a certified divorce coach. So my job is to help people divorce without going to war. I help them navigate the negotiation process by working on their communication skills, their conflict management skills, their emotional resilience, which is always a big one during divorce, and overall their negotiation skills so that they can really try and get through their divorce as fast as possible and come out at the other end strong and well equipped for the next chapter of their life. Now, I coach in French and in English, and so I have a lot of international clients. And as you can imagine, summer holidays is a big topic. Travel in general is a big topic, and one that often creates a lot of challenges post-divorce because it's not always thought through as part of the divorce process. So I'm delighted to be talking about this today.
Well, it's a great topic. It's a really interesting one. So we are, this has been recorded in early June, so we're hitting holiday season. Lots of these inquiries will be hitting the inboxes and phones of family lawyers up and down the country where there are issues about travel. But obviously, given your international and cosmopolitan background, absolutely the right person to be talking about this. So maybe should we just kick off with why planning the summer holidays? Why is that why can that often be such a contentious issue in divorced and divorcing families?
Yeah, I mean, holidays in general are a complicated matter, but the summer holidays in particular, because they're a long stretch. And so a lot of the time, parents have different handovers. They don't, neither parent will typically have all, 6 to 8 weeks with the children. And so there's a lot of handovers. There tends to be a lot of foreign travel as well. And so, meeting points are not always as easy to coordinate. And I think overall, it's when people usually go on those nicer trips and, they put a lot of effort into planning them and they want them to go well. So planning ahead of time, making sure that things go as smoothly as possible is really important in that context.
So if you have to sit down then, you're thinking about planning a holiday, when would you recommend that you raise this with your ex-partner, and how do you think the best way of doing it is?
That's a really good question. My recommendation, with everything, to be honest, in post-divorce life, because there's a need to coordinate with the other, the earlier you can plan, the better. What I always recommend to my clients is to think through their plans ahead of time, but before they book anything, to compare that to what their ex is planning, because there will be times where actually they might be nearby, and meeting up in England to do the handover of the kids isn't the most time efficient or cost efficient approach. So trying to compare notes as soon as possible to try and make things as smooth as possible, and also accepting that, timings aren't always going to be exactly the way they were planned in your parenting plan or in your CAO, because you may have said that handovers happen at 6 p.m. on a Saturday, but the flight lands at 7 p.m. So, showing a little bit of flexibility. But the key here is really trying to coordinate everything so that the planning and the execution goes as smoothly as possible.
What are the common objections? I think something that often is a common objection that I find is the sort of jump that can occur in length of time that children are with one parent and therefore away from another during the summer. You might have a contact pattern, that is, let's say dad has alternate weekends and the night during the week, and then suddenly you get into the summer and you're looking at big blocks of time away, a week, or it might be a 2-week holiday, or even a 3-week if it's a long haul thing. I think that, from my perspective, that's probably the most common objection. I'd be interested in your take on how you can kind of reconcile that jump in time, and then also any other sort of common objections that cause concern for one parent when it comes to arranging these sort of longer summer holidays.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think, again, having a documented agreement that plans out how the holidays are going to be arranged is going to be really important, because that's when you're going to agree to, potentially not seeing your kids for 3 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever it is. So making sure that those agreements are acceptable to you up front is going to be really important. But then you have to also accept that during holidays, the contact pattern is going to be different. Even the virtual contact that might happen, it may be that the children spoke to their parent, the other parent, every night at bedtime, but during the holidays, bedtime isn't quite as as routine as it is during the year. And so trying to agree ahead of time when that contact will happen, make sure that it happens at the right time. If you're on a beach holiday, don't plan it when you're at the beach. The kids are going to want to go play. They're not interested in doing a FaceTime call with their other parent. So just trying to make it sure that that contact is continued, but also reflects the new conditions they're in for that period of time.
I think that from my perspective, one of the challenges I think around summer in particular, but also the other holidays, is that I think it calls for a lot more flexibility, doesn't it? You've already addressed the fact that handover times and flights aren't going to necessarily coincide, and obviously that thing about you can't always speak at bedtime, particularly if there's time differences involved and you're in different time zones.
True.
And for some people, that can be really challenging, particularly when it's been quite a fraught separation. It's been difficult, and the way that things have worked has been a real rigid adherence to an agreement. And then you end up with that kind of that conflict between, well, rigidity's always worked for us, and certainty, because then there can be no discretion and no, well, I think this, well, I think that. So it limits the space for disagreement. But then you have to have the flexibility, so that creates more room for disagreement, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an issue that you see a lot, especially in the first few years after the divorce, when there's still a little bit of resentment and difficulty adapting to the new situation. Over time, those kind of things, ease themselves, and people realize that you can't be 100% strict about your arrangements, because things happen and you can't anticipate every potential scenario anyway. But I think if people keep in mind that this is really a special moment for them and their children, and that it is their children's holiday as well, and that they're trying to create these special memories and these times that are really going to be part of the children's memories as part of their childhood. If you keep that really at the center of it all, then it really is about doing what's best for the children. And it may be inconvenient for one parent or the other, or maybe both. But having that flexibility means that potentially the child is not going to have to travel 12 hours back to Europe to be able to go back in the other direction. And so having that coordinated approach is really ultimately about trying to make the children's experience as pleasant as possible, and focusing on the pleasure part of the holiday rather than the logistics.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, isn't it? Is bringing it back and remembering that this is a great experience for the children, that they're ultimately going to have a lovely time. I think it's often the parents that struggle with that, and it might be, for example, that it's a first holiday that the children are going on without them, that these special memories are going to be made, and they're not going to be a part of those memories for the parent that's not going. What sort of work can they do themselves? Because I guess that's more of an issue, rather than it being about logistics and plane times, etc., but about almost coming to terms with it yourself, that your children are going to be doing these lovely things and you're not necessarily going to be involved in all of them like you would have been previously. What can they do to help themselves through that?
I mean, it's difficult. I think, again, it's just thinking about what's best for your children. And at the end of the day, they're getting a lovely holiday. And it's perfectly understandable that somebody would feel resentful, especially if they felt that potentially when they were married, they weren't going on such nice holidays. And, there would be those kind of feelings of, I'm now being left out, or even a competition. I can't afford to take my children to Tahiti for 3 weeks, and a sense that they can't keep up with the way the other, their ex is treating the children. As hurtful as that is individually, it's still wonderful for the children that they're getting that experience. And I think if you focus on the glass half full and that element of things, it helps, with managing it. But overall, it's going to be just that process of disassociating yourself from your ex and learning that, the decisions they make they really aren't about you anymore. You're you're now both making your own decisions and living your own life, and comparing each other and worrying about what the other's doing versus what you're doing. It's not going to be a long-term solution, and it's going to evolve over time anyway as you start building out your own life. So it's just part of that painful transition that people have to go through in learning to split up emotionally as well.
Maybe it's a case of also planning something nice for yourself, so that you've also got something to look forward to when the children are away, perhaps something you wouldn't be able to do if the children were around, so that you've got something a little bit positive to think about, rather than kind of being sat in an empty house and just sort of continuing as you were, but with, you know, feeling the loss of the kids not being there, if you like, for that period.
I think that's a process that happens anyway, even, you know, before the holidays. Even just, you know, if your children go to your ex's house alternate weekends or half of the time, for a lot of parents that leaves an empty house, and it feels very uncomfortable, and you're not used to being alone. And again, that's a process of learning how to rediscover who you are and what you like, and things that are only for you and actually don't only exist in your role as a parent. And building out that person that you have been, but that you potentially lost a little bit throughout the marriage. And so that is part of that overall transition. It's true that holidays, because it's longer periods, it's a longer amount of time to fill up, trying to think creatively about how you can make it a pleasant experience for yourself and actually use that time for yourself is really important.
You talked a bit about the fact that one parent might have greater financial power to do, what look like more exciting holidays or more exotic holidays, and that can sometimes cause a problem for the parents. How does that affect the actual children? Is that something kids pick up on if they are being taken to, some 5-star resort and by one parent, and then it's a weekend camping with another parent? How do you help clients to address that with the kids? I mean, my experience is that actually kids aren't often all that fussed about how glamorous or expensive a holiday is. And
they like camping. And it's usually the ones that we least enjoy that they enjoy the most.
A few years ago, I just before COVID, we took our kids to Disney Paris, and we went down and we drove down to the weekend Paris and did all that stuff. The thing that the kids remember most about it, that they talk about all the time, is the Premier Inn that we all stayed in Dover the night before the night before the ferry. Like, we could have just gone down to Dover, stayed in the hotel, and come back up. But how do that's obviously clearly my kids are a bit weird. But how do you deal with parents to get them to adjust to that new reality for the kids and communicate that to them in the best way?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of cases, as you say, it's the parents who are upset much more than the children. For the children, it's about spending quality time with their parents. They don't care where you are. I mean, if there's a pool, wonderful. If it's sunny, great. But for them, it's really about that special experience of being with their parents and doing something that they don't usually do. And, it might just be staying at a hotel, or it could be, for my kids, it was a flight to Mexico. We went on holiday to Mexico, and they loved the flight because they had a little TV and the lady kept bringing them food. So, that's the stuff they remember. And I think the parents tend to be very hung up on it. But unless, as parents, we transfer that over to our children by pointing it out and making it into an issue, the kids don't look at it that way. They just see it as a super holiday with mom, a super holiday with dad, or with dad and dad, whatever it is. But for them, it's the time and the quality of the time. And we often think that showing our children love is about giving material things. And really, the language of love for children is time and attention. And so that's what it's all about. And that really needs to be the focus. They do not care whether they're going to an expensive holiday or, as you say, just camping or, just to their grandparents' house down the road.
So you've addressed some of the things that you should do, and kind of common themes on a lot of these podcasts: communication, doing things sooner rather than later, being flexible. These are all themes that crop up time and time again. Is there a list of stuff that you've seen that parents absolutely shouldn't do? What's the avoid list, apart from the kind of the opposite of all that, of leaving stuff late, yes, not communicating? What shouldn't be done?
I think that you need to think a little bit sensitively about handovers, especially when they're happening, in various destinations. if they're happening at airports or in a gas station along the motorway, just try to make them not too transactional. The children, will feel like they're just being thrown out of the car, into one car, into the other. You want to make it as smooth as possible, and for the children not to feel like it's, they're just a package being, moved around. So if you can, as much as possible, arrange a little bit of overlap, make sure that it's in a place that's pleasant. Potentially you meet for lunch or for even just a cup of coffee in a restaurant, if it has to be somewhere, that's not in someone's house. But because there's that travel element to things, making sure that it isn't too transactional, I think, is really important. And the other bit that we mentioned is just not entering into a competition with regards to money spent and glamorous holidays. Just making it a holiday that you think your children will enjoy, that you will enjoy, because if the parents are happy and relaxed, the kids will be very happy as well. So really focusing on that rather than, again, that comparison part, which is really tempting, especially in the early days of the divorce. And then, I think trying to avoid too much travel for the children, back to what we were saying around the centricity of your plans, really focusing on the children. Try and arrange it so that they don't have to go back and forth in many ways if that's avoidable. And in a lot of cases, by speaking to each other early on, you can see that actually there is a much more efficient way of meeting up and of the transferring the children from one parent to the other. So trying to reduce that as much as possible, because it contributes to that sense from the children that they're just being shipped around and moved around from one parent to the other. It needs to feel like a smooth holiday to them and something that's kind of a continuous flow. So I think those are probably the main ones. But, in general, early planning, coordination, communication are really going to be key. It allows you as well to get all of the documentation that you need. You might need authorizations to take the children abroad. You might need to get the passports from the other parent. All of that documentation that takes a bit of time to gather. The more you can plan ahead, the more you can avoid issues with the last minute, trying to figure everything out at the last minute and potentially disagreeing about things at the 11th hour.
Yeah, I think that's all right. I'm going to put Matt on the spot now because obviously we've talked a lot about communication. And unfortunately, when people get into our offices, it tends to be because that communication is broken down, or they cannot reach an agreement, or one parent won't hand over the passports, or they've changed their mind last minute, or whatever, a whole host of issues that have arisen because, that communication just hasn't worked. So perhaps, Matt, you could go through, can you just take your kids on holiday without the other parent's approval? What if they don't agree? What are your options, etc.?
Yeah, so start with the classic lawyer answer of it depends. And the first port of call is there currently a child arrangements order in force? If there's a child arrangements order in force which provides that your children live with you, and this can be it can be that children live with both parents. It could be a lives with order, or what we call lives with spends time with order. But if the children live with you, you have the automatic ability to take your children out of the jurisdiction for up to 28 days without the consent of the other party. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have a week on, week off, pattern, you can just take them out for 28 days, because then you'll have breached the pattern. But provided you are working within the constraints of what the child arrangements order says, you can do that if you've got a lives with order. If you don't have a lives with order, or there's no order in place at all, then you can't remove the children from the jurisdiction, even temporarily, without the consent of the anyone else with parental responsibility. So you do need consent, and otherwise you are potentially facing an abduction offence, which is not a great place to be in. So, don't do that. So the starting point is to get consent. And most people will, give the consent if it's reasonable. There is a difference in terms of where you go in terms of likelihood of consent. If you want to take your kids to France or, to Italy, that's fine. If you are taking the children to areas of the world that might be a bit more dangerous, if there's been disease outbreaks, if there's something at the time that makes things tricky. So, to go back to the COVID days, that was very difficult before the flights were grounded, or in the sort of mid-lockdown periods where travel was a bit sketchy, that makes it harder. And people are less likely to consent to that. If you can't get consent, then you've got the normal sort of suite of options to resolve things. So we'd always kind of suggest mediation as the first protocol. This sort of thing is ideal for mediation, absolutely ideal, because while if you can't reach agreement, you can apply to court for a specific issue order to get consent to go abroad for holidays, it's problematic for a number of reasons. One, by the time you've exhausted the other options, you're probably running very short in time for court proceedings, and it just might not be possible to resolve it in that short period of time. Two, the court doesn't really want to deal with this sort of issue. It will say, by and large, that there is a decision for the parents to make and is not a great use of court time. And specifically, given the changes to the family procedure rules in 2024, recently from when we're recording now, about non-court dispute resolutions, the court's got more powers to make people go and use NCDR, and I would imagine that most judges would say go and mediate on this. So I think a court application is probably not going to be that likely. But if you end up before the court will look at what's in the best interest of the children, applying all the usual factors that we talk about all the time. If you want to take them to somewhere where there is there's war or there's violence, or the foreign office warn against travel to certain areas, you're less likely to get to go. If you want to take the children to a non-Hague country where there's an abduction risk, you're less likely to want to go, less likely to get to go. If you want to take them to a beach and it's a few days and there's no safeguarding risk, you're more likely to be able to go. So that's a real quick sprint through it. But my absolute number one bit of advice is that if you think there may be any objections to holidays, talk about it early and get into some sort of non-court dispute resolution. I mean, Chloe, is that have you got anything to add for that from what you see from your clients when there's objections raised?
No, I completely agree. I think a lot of the objections I hear are either the destination or who's going to be on the holiday. And so that's something that I try to encourage people to document in their parenting plan or their CAO. What kind of information do they need the other person to give them, even if it's not for an approval, if it's just to inform them that they're traveling abroad? Are there specific pieces of information that they want to have? Because the typical one is when there's a new partner that enters the picture and the new partner is joining on the holiday, and that can be hard to accept. And sometimes the other parent feels like it's too soon or we're not. And so those are the kind of topics that lead to issues. And actually, people then don't want the trip to happen. And it really isn't about the trip. It's more about who's going to be there or where they're going. So agreeing on those kind of parameters early on, again, is going to avoid those challenges. Being clear about what information needs to be shared, how you're going to be able to contact the children while they're away, etc. I think the more you can document that, the better it will be in giving everybody peace of mind. But accepting that there's some things that you can't control. They're going to have a new partner and they're going to want to go on holiday with them. It's fair enough. I work a lot with my clients as well on that, is just accepting the bits that you can't control and they're just part of, post-divorce life.
And so that's kind of, I think that's really helpful. And obviously some great advice there for sort of planning the fun part of the summer holidays and the exotic part. I wonder if we want to talk about, very few people are going away for the full 6 weeks of the summer holidays. Very few people can afford that or want to do it or can get the time off work to do it. So I wonder if it's worth us having a bit of discussion about the rest of the summer, because it's quite common that, especially given the constraints of work time and taking annual leave, your normal contact pattern is sort of suspended. You've got a term time pattern, which might be whatever it is, 3-4-4-3, or alternate weekends, or whatever works for you. And then you get to the summer and it's slightly all bets are off. You're not doing the school pickups at 3:30 or after the school club. You're not doing the drop-offs. Things change. It all goes a bit skew-if. And suddenly you've got, speaking as working parents, you've got this huge time to fill where it would be ideal if the kids don't spend the entirety of it on YouTube. But so how do you navigate the other parts of the holiday? Because if you both said, okay, I'll have week 1 of the summer holidays, I'm going away, and week 4 of the summer holidays, you're going away. You've got another 4 weeks to work with. What are some of the issues that can arise then, and how do you work through them?
As much as possible, you're going to want to try and keep the patterns you have in place during the term time. Of course, there's no school to pick them up from, but at least the days should stay more or less the same. I think it's best for the children as well, because there is that sense of routine. They completely understand that when you're abroad or not at home, things have to change. But when they're at home, actually, for them, it's that same that same regular pattern. So unless one of the parents is going away on their own while the children are on holiday, if you can maintain that regular pattern, that'll be better for everybody. And then it means that the parents are also comfortable with it because it's a pattern that they're used to and that they've already accepted. So the more you can be, encourage that stability, the better. In terms of challenges, the main challenge is keeping the children busy when you're working and they don't have school. And again, if you can try and communicate, it might be that actually you can do things slightly differently in a way that allows the children to have more time, to be with one parent that has the time at that moment to be with them, and not necessarily, even though it's meant to be the time with the other, with the one who's working and can't really give them much attention. So it's again back to thinking about, first of all, being flexible, but also thinking about what's best for the children, and really trying to move away from the parents thinking of it as my time or his time with the children, but the children's time, and what's the best way for them to spend their time. And as you said, if usually parents agree that them spending all day in front of YouTube is not the best use of their time. So if there's an option for them to be with the other parent because that parent's available and can take them to the park or wherever, then why wouldn't you? It's not about who has their right to have the kids. It's about what's going to be best for the children in that context. But I think flexibility is going to be key across all of this.
Yeah, and then it brings in, and also I think sometimes that an issue that we see is one parent will say, well, look, my parents can look after the kids, and the other parent says, well, that's my time. So, but there's just a practical issue. There are lots of practical logistical issues about that, and being a bit more flexible to allow that. And think again, it comes back to what's best for the kids. Is it great for them to sit in the house while you're sort of half working and half caring for them, not having a great time? Can they spend time with grandparents? Is there a holiday club you can send them to? That then brings in issues about who pays for the holiday club, obviously. Yes. But that's something that can either be negotiated, or you just say that, look, if they are on holiday club in my time, I will pay for them. If they're in holiday club in your time, you will pay for them. Is probably the simplest way to deal with that. Lisa, any other thoughts about the sort of negotiating the ever so long summer holidays, and the sort of the slightly less glamorous parts of it from your client's perspective?
It just gives me palpitations just thinking about the summer holidays that are approaching, I can't lie. But no, I think we've pretty much covered everything. It just comes down to communication. We ramble on about it all the time. And just putting the children's needs first over and above, what you may want. You may want to see them, but like you say, if they're just sat on YouTube whilst you're working, it's not really quality time, is it? So thinking about that quality time rather than the quantity of time during the holidays. And also, it is beneficial for children to spend time with their, grandparents, extended families, all the rest of it. So that if there is the ability for them to help out as well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean one parent doesn't want to see their children, but it provides more opportunities for the children. So I think definitely just communication and being child focused. But easier said than done. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Chloe, we like to finish on these podcasts with a nice little neat summary and try and finish on a bit of positive note, because obviously a lot of what we talk about, not necessarily always that positive. So could you just give your sort of top tips for anyone who wants to, they're trying to embark on the summer holiday negotiations? What are your top tips for making sure kids can get through the summer holidays when they've got separated parents?
Yeah, I think it's all things that we've mentioned already, but certainly planning ahead. And communicating, so sharing those plans with each other, remembering that it is the children's holidays and that it's a moment for them to appreciate, enjoy, remember, and that if you're trying to build those memories with your children and make these special moments, you can do that by not including tension in the whole process. So the less conflict you can have during that negotiation, the better it will be for everybody. And then the more relaxing the holiday can be for your children and for yourself. And then I'd say the last tip I would say is just understand that you have to be flexible, that life isn't necessarily something that you can document in a CAO or a parenting plan, that you can have those principles in place. But you're going to have to flex during holidays and in many other contexts after your divorce, and understanding that you're going to have to be reasonable, have logical and reasonable proposals to bring to your ex, and listen to their point of view as well, so that you can really find solutions that work for everybody. That's going to be kind of your MO during, the whole period of time where your children are still underage and you're collaborating as parents. You're going to have to be able to communicate, and showing some flexibility and understanding for the other person's position is going to be really important as well. So I'd say that those would be the top three.
So that's it for this episode of Stowe Talks. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much, Chloe, for joining us. You can find out more about all the work that Chloe does supporting people going through a relationship breakdown at her website, thedivorceandseparationcoach.com. If you would like more information on our podcasts, head over to stowtalks.co.uk, and please rate, like, share and review this podcast where you can.